person has their hand up as you're moving your things forward. And there's lots of space up here. We can move some more chairs up. Beautiful.
It's a good question, I guess, for any artist who wants to answer it. Because we've been speaking so much about the role of community in the art we make, and the very tricky realization that so much of the art we make is not viewed by community members, and it's in art galleries. Mariel, you were speaking to that pretty truthfully, and I really appreciate that. That's something that I definitely struggle with in my own practice of curating. So I'm just wondering, from an artist perspective, what the best role of an Indigenous curator can be to make sure that ethically your work is being taken care of, but also that community is being taken care of when we curate such important pieces. I don't know what to do.
Can you ask that question one more time? Sorry.
Oh, just the role of Indigenous curating when it comes to curating hard villages, and also curating, understanding that so often community does not come into the space, and how can we as curators work with Indigenous communities, with our own communities, and for the art before the institutions.
I guess I think a lot about when I think about doing community work, because curation is I think it's a practice of care. And such, I think also the role of the curator too is kind of a very colonial role. And so how to dismantle that power structure is actually, I think Wes is actually doing something really interesting with that, because Wes just curated this really great thing in Vancouver called Together Apart, which was a queer Indigenous Two-Spirit symposium. And so this next iteration, Wes wants to turn it into a collective to dismantle the notion of the individual who only has power, because I think a lot of the art shows I do see that are, a lot of shows that I see that are really frustrating, that can be by Indigenous or non-Indigenous, are where they're just about the curator, they're actually, and then the art kind of is just in the background. And so it's just about the curator's ideas, which are never new or actually that radical, because they're just perpetuating similar very colonial ways of being. And so I think what's interesting is when that role starts to get deconstructed, where it's not about the individual, it's actually about the collective, so everybody can be nourished, not just the curator who gets paid, So how do we do that? How do we start doing that? And how do we start interrogating these archives of these institutions, who would never consider showing 70-year-old lesbian women who are Indigenous, So I think for me, when I'm always thinking, it's always about nourishment, and that nourishment is pleasure, and how do we, we can't get to liberation without that pleasure. So, yeah.
Thanks, that's a good question. I think for curators, in particular Indigenous curators, whatever practice that you're supposed to do at home and community, you got to do that in the art gallery too. You really can't pretend like it's something separate. Same with the institution too, the academy. You really have to do it here first. There's no point in hiring somebody to be a community liaison if they're not from the community. It's just redundant, and it's actually mean. It's really mean. And so when you come into a territory, in particular, because we're here, look around, see who's already being promoted, and go find somebody else. Because really, that's what needs to happen. Everybody gets the one artist, and it's the favorite artist, and then they forget that there's other artists around. I think another thing is that if you're going to be in our territories, go actually to the community. Speak to the actual people. Introduce yourself, because it's called visitor protocol. And we know this, we do it at home. And so whatever you do somewhere else, you have to do here too. Because that's how we re-indigenize the practice. And that's how we bring community back to art. Like, in my own experience, I'm not a curator, but I've had to curate shows just so that my community can see them. And the irony to that is that the art galleries don't see me. I mean, they are now, thankfully. Thankfully they are. And this is the thing, right? Like, nobody would show 70-year-old queer poets, because why? Everybody needs to hear them. Probably why is why they don't want to hear us in particular, and I think that's really important. And I think the curator position is something that should be thinking of being a little bit more collective about, because it always feels like they're looking for the next big thing, and that never happens here. The next big thing is never somebody from here, which is sad. It's really sad. It's always somebody from the next territory, or from the coast, or from the East Coast, or from up north, but it's never from here, wherever here is. That's all. Sheldon?
Okay, it's pretty timely. I think that question came up because just recently, having that conversation with Paul down at the Indigenous Art Gallery, I've had different interactions that are on different opposite ends of that scale, and we had that discussion of the role in galleries and curators and what role they play in commodifying and how they benefit from that. And, I think both of the ladies spoke to it of that care that needs to be there, I recently had to butt heads with the Vernon Art Gallery, with the executive director and the curator, because of the lack of care that their staff had taken in creating an event that was essentially piggybacking off of a exhibition that myself and my partner had wrote on food sovereignty. And the gallery came in and created a forum to speak on food sovereignty, used images of my partner and her friend and one of the artists. Nobody came and asked. Nobody even notified. Nobody even asked us to come and participate. And so, we took a bit of time and kind of avoided it for a bit. So we didn't come in there and essentially just blow up on them. But we came in and we sat down with them, and it was so opposites of them sitting on the other table with their staff and it being very businesslike and not taking accountability, and us on the other side explaining that importance of building a relationship. I think in anything with Indigenous people, with scale of people, you're probably going to have to take 10 years or more to build a relationship with us till we can fully trust you and understand your intent and what you're wanting out of this, because a lot of times we're only included in things when there's a benefit to the other side. We take a look at this thing called democracy. It's supposed to be inclusive. Indigenous people weren't included in that process until 59 years ago. And that type of process and that type of doing things when it comes to the not involving us is so embedded in every corner of this culture that we're trying to hold space in, that, that whole idea of commodifying and taking, You know, like Mariel says, you don't see any of the artists that are really being lifted up, and, you know, the galleries, if you go down to the coast, your artist is getting maybe 10% of what a piece sells for, and the gallery's taking 90% out of, who knows, 30,000 or more, and your artists are sitting there on the street now, where artists have gone to standing in front of a department store on the street selling their art because they can make a little more money there. And so, you know, the idea for me is that, because I had actually Paul and them ask me, they're like, well, do you have a gallery that represents you? And I was like, no, I never would. So that's like that's completely the wrong question to be asking, you know? I was like, why would any Indigenous artist want a gallery or somebody to represent them? You know, you're having somebody who is a stranger to your work going out and peddling it to take their commission. You know, and I think that's where we need to really, and the work that Tanya's done and the work that Mariel's done of creating these own spaces on the land, taking what Indigenous art is and recreating a space that is ours. Because the galleries and the whole contemporary art world, I think, has always been intended to benefit, you know? And so if we're not in there creating those spaces for ourselves, a lot of times we don't get those spaces. And so, again, it comes to the Mariel's point. If it's not sellable, if it's not a marketable thing, as to your point too, if they can't market it and know that they can make $1 off of it, they're not going to promote it. You know, and we talk and talk about a lot of very important Indigenous artists through, you know, from the early years in the 70s and forward, that are completely unknown. They're completely forgotten, that have not gotten their due credit for what they've brought to the art world. And the curator holds those strings as to whether you are noticed and you become somebody, or you're, you know, and we bought into that we need that approval. And I think that idea of just going out and claiming space without approval is where we need to be. You know, I struggle with it at times, because in my early years I'd go out and just graffiti up a wall and be gone, and I was like, yes. You know, that feeling of taking a space is amazing now. And now, obviously, I can't do that now, because people, I'd get in trouble for it. And that's the thing, is when you go in and want to take space, you get in trouble for it, because now you're not playing by their rules. And Indigenous art, it was never looked at as art the way it is now. It had meaning, it had use, it had ceremonial thing, you know, connections. And so when people came in, collectors started coming in, they commodified it from the outset of contact. Taking our clothing, our tools, sending it back Europe and making money from it. And from that point forward, I think people understood that they could sell a culture. And that is where we're at, I think, in these gallery spaces. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely some curators out there that are doing the work, that have that understanding of the need for that relationship first. It's like, you know, you don't just come to the table with an idea and be like, okay, let's figure this out, hammer it out, and let's move forward on to the next thing, and that's behind us now, you know. So we've really got to focus on building a relationship.
I don't like really talking that much, but I'm trying to clarify like all the ideas of like knowing and being without and confronting this colonial system that we are born into, like myself. And Sheldon, I think for your conversation, you talk about like how your origin stories dictate your art practice and like how you make it work. And I was just self-reflecting on the idea of like my origin stories is like Adam and Eve, for example. That's my origin stories. And thinking how that has impacted me in terms of that, how that disassociation that you felt in terms of like your identity and culture, and you felt like something was missing. For me, it's like in terms of this whole conversation we're having today, is in terms of reconnecting with the land, with the ancestors, with the stories, and that's what I've been going through this process of like reconnecting with my parents, for example. My mom is from China, my dad was born in Trinidad, so it helps me, like it's very comforting, like hearing their stories for once. And the whole colonial systems of like pedagogy in terms of education, it's like it's all English, so that's all I know. And it's beautiful that like most of you here like know like your origin stories in their language or with people. And for me, I feel very traumatized in that sense, in terms of like my language. I don't really know it. I understand it bits and pieces, but it still doesn't say that, you know, like I cannot reconnect with my culture through my mom and through my dad. So it's more like a comment and just appreciation for the discussions and conversations that are happening today. And I thank everyone who have talked today for that.
Thanks, Josh. Any other final comments people would like to make? Rita?
Hi everyone. Thanks Josh for sharing that story. I have a similar sentiment. My mom is from Africa, my dad's from India, and I know very little about origin stories of those cultures as well. But I had a question for any of the artists really, and I come from a healthcare background, so that's probably why I noticed that there was a common kind of health and wellness and healing theme amongst all of your art. And thank you, Mariel and Sheldon, for sharing like such personal health stories. And my question is, how would you guys best engage healthcare professionals in your communities? Like, how would you consider collaborating with them, and if so, how?
Well, I know that Sheldon's already doing that work, so he can speak to that. For myself, being somebody who goes to speak to these people on a regular, semi-yearly basis now, because he's not sure if I'm bipolar anymore. But I try to speak to them very frank. I try to be very direct with them and getting them to understand that there is a process happening inside my brain, and I need to act on it, and it has to be in a way that is more safe, right? And so a lot of times I think, oh, okay, well that means that you need to stay away from drinking, you need to stay away from alcohol, you need to stay away from this, you need to stay away from that, these bad things. But in my case, what it was is you need to stay away from coffee. You need to stay away from junk food. You need to get back to more traditional foods. You need to get back out into the forest and berry pick. And you need to learn how to hunt. And you, like for me, for mental health, inside my brain, it's telling me this is shit. This does not work for people. It works for some people only because they let it work, not because it's really working. You know, if it was really working, we wouldn't be sitting in a time bomb of climate change. It's progress. We're progressing ourselves to death. And it comes at our health expense, right? Because we just want to buy everything. And it's coming so fast now that our children are checking out. Like, you know, from all the things that our parents are trying to teach us, they just like, I'm not having any of it. They said that the millennials have a totally different way of understanding. They do, because they were born into the digital era. There is no sense of land there. They're not connected really, even though you try to connect them. They grow up, become 18 and say, I'm an adult now and I'm gonna do whatever I want. And I know this after them, and I was one of them too. So, you know, like we can't, as health professionals, silo ourselves in that. Just like academics can't be academics, they have to be worldly people. We have to be community-minded people. And so like when I talk to my doctor, I tell him, well, everything I'm telling you, you need to write down. And then go talk to somebody in your conferences or your groups or something and tell them, this is what's happening for my client. And I've noticed it actually. When I talk about things on the internet or something, you know, some kind of area where other people are able to filter through, they start picking up on different things. So since I've been diagnosed with that bipolar and watching the news feeds in my Instagram and in my Twitter, and mostly Twitter, you can see doctors now writing about how bipolar affects people differently. Writing about how you need to be more thoughtful of your food choices and more aware of how much sleep you're actually getting, because these things affect our brains, you know, and that we can't be so rigid in our cycle. And so you can see also in like the bigger corporations trying to co-opt these ideas of health, corporate health. You know, that's crap too. Because all it is regurgitating capitalism with a new title. And our industries are all fed by that, including the health industry, right? And so when we silo ourselves to think, oh, we're just health professionals, we are doing huge disservices to the people. Huge disservices. To the point where we all burn out. We all get burned out. So that we all don't want to have that. And progress means burnout.
Sheldon? I'm going to need
So again, what I'll do is bring up the bat. It's about relationships, same to the question. Everything with our people is protocols and relationship building before anything. Because if you don't understand who we are or where we're coming from, you don't know how to approach us. And so I'm going to give an example that came across, and this wasn't just about Indigenous artists, but Interior Health built a brand new building in Kelowna a few years ago, $40–50 million building. After finished building it, they say, hey, artists, we understand the importance of art. We know how it helps healing people. We know the impact of it. Can you fill our building for free? And I had engaged a year prior than anyone else in the community, and I just kind of was like, okay, well, I'm gonna step back and we'll see how this unfolds. And it didn't unfold good, not for Interior Health, and they understood I would hope that they understood that their approach, again, the commodifying of it and saying, oh no, look, we'll create this space, we'll give you exposure. I told them that I can't put food on my table or pay my bills with exposure, And so that's a good example of what not to do, is to come in and expect that, that have that entitlement mentality that something is owed to them, or that it's just a given that we'd come in and do this for them. And so, on other sides of it, the one that we'd seen, it's at the Kelowna Hospital of the root digger. I think there's still obviously things to build on those types of processes, but what they did was they came in and they took the time. They took a year or more, I think, back and forth with people in the nation of discussing. And I think really understanding what health is to us. And that's the big thing is that the re-education piece is always something I find that we as Scale people have to do when we walk into any space that isn't our own, is all of a sudden we have to educate who we are, why we're there, and you know, a lot of times they have a mandate. They got a checkbox that they want to fill, and they want to fill it and check that box as quick as possible. Please, whoever's tasked them with this job of engaging an artist, and move on again. And again, it's a commodification. To them, it's just something nice that hangs on the wall. And I spoke to this 3 years ago. And I spoke to this in front of a repatriation symposium that was held in Kelowna, full of curators, full of museum experts. And I told them, you know, and I think a number of us, Luann Neal and the other artists on the panel, is that art isn't just art for us. You know, that definition of art is completely different. You know, when we create a piece, that piece carries a part of us. The piece carries a part of our ancestors, it carries our struggles, it carries our hopes, it carries a lot in it. And so, until they can understand what art is for us and what health is for us, coming in and making if you're going through a drive-through and making an order and driving off, that approach just isn't going to get them where they want. I've turned down a number of different organizations that have come in and have asked for stuff, but they don't want to take the time to learn the meaning behind the art. They don't want to understand what health is, you know. But some of them will take that time. And once they can, you know, once the health profession can understand that health to us isn't, like I said, the doctor or the prescription. It's land, language, ceremony, family. You know, those are the things that heal us. And until that can be understood, the approach will most likely always be very abrasive, and it won't move ahead. You know, sitting in a political realm for our nation, it's always about being blunt. Mariel says, be very frank. You know, a lot of times we don't get space. Like Eric says, you know, or Richard says, you know, we could talk for days. That chaptik he told of the animal people deciding what they were going to do about us, we're told, because the place is just south of Washington. I forget the actual name of the place, but that story has a connection to the land where it happened. And when that meeting happened, those people met for a month or two to decide on things. And our people always met that way. We're process, we're relationship. And so if they have something in mind, they better start reaching out a year or two beforehand and start understanding who we are. Because again, we don't respond well to coming in and asks, can I have this? Give me this, give me. You know, that's not where we come from. So, you know, again, any kind of approach has to start with a relationship. We have to be able to trust. Given that the last 150 years are built on nothing but mistrust and oppression and racism and everything, you know, that interior health is a racist system, just like the education system has been racist, just like the governance system has been racist. They've all been oppressive, and they've all pushed us aside and then called us back when they want what they want from us, and then they push us back again. And so we have to get deeply embedded into understanding what a system is and what a system's intention is. And a lot of times the administration that runs a system, their job is to follow a policy. The policy is intended to keep you in line, status quo, and it's intended to toe the line. We are on a completely opposite, and so until there can be an understanding of our being, there's always going to be some butting of heads. But again, just like the curators, there are some people in those systems. We're told that there's about 10 or 15% in a system that there's about that much wiggle room to make change. And so there are those people that are in there that are making change, and you know, it's about looking at the individual as a human and understanding that they're not a marketable or commodified item. So I think that's all I got for that. Did you wanna?
I think it's been 4.5 hours of, four and a half hours of incredible thought, displays of art, discussions around some incredibly important political and ideological frames. And this is the last Wednesday gathering that we'll have in this summer intensive. So before I thank the panel, I want to shout out to folks like Toby and Stephen and Tanya. And since you're all in the mode for clapping, I'd like you to give it up for Anne, for Mariel, and for Sheldon.
Well, I'll just, everybody's, I'm sure, needing a break after we had so much. Just so grateful for all of the artists, for the panel today, for the keynote today, for all of you who's also have contributed your, space and your mind and heart to take in these conversations. And I think they continue to move with us through, as we leave this space, and they connect us through as you go and visit your homes and your families and your places of work. And so I think that just maybe we keep that in mind, that care and that respect for how we take some of our experiences and the knowledge gained. And I'll remind everyone of sort of the theme that we sort of hovered around and talked about throughout the classes, as well as the presentation, this idea of citation, both not in a strict academic sense, but in the sense of building on knowledge that came before us and knowledge of the land. And so I think these are the things we can take forward in our work and our places that we're moving on to, and be really grateful for the legacy of work that Stephen, Mike Evans, Ashok, Peter, others who've worked on the intensive have brought together, the many students who've passed through here and have attended past intensives as well. And so just thank you all, Cook's Jam, Lim Limt, and thank you all for all of the things that you contributed, and for respect and love for all those things you brought, and that will continue to nourish us.